Initially, I mean, they were right there from the beginning at Bunker Hill, and then some of the agitation leading up to the revolution itself. And so they initially enlisted in the Continental Army, and George Washington, perhaps at the urging of some of the other Southern officers, banned their use. Then he rescinded the order, and he would never reimpose it because he found them to be good soldiers. Unlike in later wars, they fought next to white soldiers. There was a regiment that was almost all black, of free blacks from Rhode Island who fought, but it wasn't completely black. And in other regiments, they fought right with other soldiers. There were instances in which, like for example in Pennsylvania, they offered a bounty to slaveholders that if they would enlist a slave, the slave would get freedom, and then the slaveholder would get a grant of land to compensate them for that slave's freedom. So there were some who did enlist with this idea of gaining freedom. And the idea that did they support the ideals of the revolution? I think so. I mean, I think that like other Americans, like everyone else, the ideas of the Declaration were what moved them. And so that would apply to them was an idea that was very appealing, I think. I don't think they were naive. They knew that it would be difficult, that masters were skeptical of doing this and that it wouldn't be easy to do. But I think that they believed in that cause. Well, large numbers in Virginia. We're not quite sure how many. You know, it's difficult. This is before the age of computers and before people kept exact records. Thomas Jefferson estimated that 30,000 slaves fled to the British or were taken by the British. It was hard to say because, of course, Lord Dunmore initially issued his proclamation. And then the British Army and the British raided under Benedict Arnold initially, and then under Lord Cornwallis, came into Virginia. And so slaves fled to the British Army. The ones who had fled to Cornwallis and to Dunmore were, most of them died from smallpox. They had, of course they were quarantined onto Gwen's Island, a little island in the Chesapeake with Lord Dunmore, close confinement with each other and with sailors and soldiers, and many of them died of smallpox. Those who had accompanied Cornwallis's army, because his army moved through the Carolinas and into Virginia, and so he accumulated a number of slaves who had fled to his army seeking freedom. And by the time he reaches Yorktown, he has them there, and of course he has no provisions to feed them, and so he turns them loose into the wilds, and so a number of them die from smallpox or hunger, and we have some very poignant descriptions by some of the Continental Army officers and others who found them in the condition that they were in, and that sort of thing. So it was hard. South Carolina, the total population there, it's interesting. The best take we can get is that at the time of the Revolution, about 60% of the population was enslaved. By the end of the Revolution, the best count that we can get is about 43%. So again, it's a place where perhaps as many as 30,000 slaves fled to the British. They occupied large parts of South Carolina for several years, Charleston and some of the upcountry. And so when they pulled out of Charleston and they pulled out of New York, because there were also slaves that had fled to the British there, they took the slaves with them. And they settled some in Nova Scotia, and then others, of course, were totally betrayed and sold into slavery into the West Indies. And it was a mixed result. Others were taken back to Britain and freed, and others, those from Nova Scotia, many of them ended up in Sierra Leone on the west coast of Africa, and which started a colony there for these people, these American slaves who had fled to the British. So it was a very difficult path that many of these people followed, and it was a fatal one for many of them, mostly through disease.